Hello and welcome to a special edition of The Drum, coming to you from the cool high country of the Darling Downs, the town of Stanthorpe in southern Queensland. Drought has crept across the paddocks and all the way into towns across the nation. In all, more than 50 towns are counting down the days until they run out of water. Here in Stanthorpe, that day zero has already passed. The dams are all but dry, this place described as going from fruit bowl to dust bowl. We're in the Granite Belt, an area known for its truly cold winter nights. There's snow occasionally, a novelty for Queenslanders, and in summer, a mild subtropical climate is perfect for the apple orchards and vineyards the area is famous for. It's part of the Border Rivers area, a catchment straddling New South Wales and Queensland. 5% of all the water in the Murray-Darling Basin flows from here. Stanthorpe's only town water supply is the Storm King Dam. 90% empty, it's a puddle, useful only in emergencies. So each day, every day, 40 or 50 truckloads of water are carted into this town from the nearby Connolly Dam in Warwick. The cost? $800,000 a month. The Queensland Government foots the bill. No surprise then that water is rationed here. 80 litres per person per day in this council area. That means 4 half flushes of the toilet per person per day and just a sinkful of washing up water every second day. It's no longer just the bush suffering in this big dry. The drought has come to town. And with me on the panel tonight, our third-generation winemaker and owner of the Golden Grove Winery, Sam Costanzo. Thanks so much for coming in. GP, Associate Professor of First Peoples Health at Griffith University and Vice President of the Australian Indigenous Doctors Association, Dr Shannon Springer. Thanks for being with us, Shannon. We also have the Mayor in tonight, Mayor of the Southern Downs Regional Council, Tracy Dobie. Good to see you. Ellen. Wonderful to hear that rain.
It is beautiful, isn't it?
Yes. Fingers crossed that means something, but you're not quite convinced yet. Is that right?
No. One downpour of rain doesn't break a drought. We know that from history, and while it is beautiful here in Stanthorpe at the moment, it's so green and the rain is welcome. It's freezing cold, as you can see. Yeah. But this isn't the end of our drought, no.
And also a regular on the program who's driven up over the hill, I think you said, Mal, just 200 clicks to get here. Beef producer, chair of the Regional Australia Institute and councillor at the Inverell Shire Council, Mal Peters. Thanks for being here, Mal.
Thank you, Ellen.
Let's talk about this drought. We've talked about the green drought. That's what they talk about in town. There's been a little bit of water. And people in towns are on water restrictions, Tracy. But just, this is materially different, this drought here. Make people understand what it means.
I think what's different about this drought, Ellen, is it's gone on for so long. Normally our droughts are signified by below average rainfall, but this is well below average rainfall. And from an urban water perspective, we have 50% of our residents live in the rural sector. They've had no inflow into their house tanks. They've had no inflow into their dams. So that has meant that they are reliant on someone else to help them with their water, because for many of them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years of drought means they have no income.
And that's what you wanted me to understand before. It's not just an ordinary drought, it's no rain.
It's been no rain. That's exactly right. And so even though we had a bit of rain in January, so we've now had a number of summers. It usually rains in Queensland in summer. We've had a number of consecutive summers now with no rain. So we've had a bit of rain just in the last couple of weeks. In January, we had about 100 mil average across our region. That's why it looks green at the moment. But you put a nail down in that ground and you'll find that the water only goes down a little way, and then the soil, all the subsoil, is dehydrated.
And Sam, you're third generation, as I was saying, at Golden Grove Winery. You said that in the worst of this, in the last few months, it's like living on another planet. What do you mean?
Well, it just got to the point where you felt you were on another planet. It was so dry, that hot wind just blowing across, and then all the smoke. Yeah. And I said to one of the workers one day, I was just so down and out and seeing the vines just struggling, just very little growth, no crop, and I says, anyone thinks we're on another planet. Yeah. It was just... you get up in the morning and it was smoke coming across, and then the wind would pick up and everything was dry, so it's just exactly how it felt.
And I mean, you parents and your grandparents have been in this area all these years. Did you ever think you'd have to truck in expensive water to keep grapevines alive?
No, Ellen, never ever thought we would have to do that. We've had dry periods, for sure. We've definitely had dry periods. I remember as a little kid we used to go down to the creek and fill up 44-gallon drums. In those days we had stone fruit as well, and we used to put it round the trees. But that was only for a short period. But this has just gone on so long. So long. So never thought they had to do that, because a lot of the veggie growers last year were trucking in water to carry their crop through. And we used to say, God, imagine having to do that.
Imagine that.
And little did we know that we had to kick off that way in springtime to give the vines something to get the buds to shoot out. And even so, they didn't shoot out evenly. They were all over the place.
And have you got anything to show for this year, other than you've kept the vines
Only just
alive?
nice green leaves now from the new growth. No crop.
Okay.
No, we've got no crop.
And so, Shannon, you move around. You're in Forbes, sometimes you're being a GP in Charleville, you're talking to Indigenous communities and to farmers. You know, we hear about coronavirus as an immediate public health emergency. It is. But this is kind of like a silent, creeping public health emergency, isn't it?
Yeah, and I guess that's the nature of droughts. You know, it's such an insidious onset. And, you know, just picking up what Sam is saying, you know, how he's feeling watching his crop go down and not producing a crop. And, you know, this can have a deep mental health impact on people going through droughts. And that's well known about. But also talking about the dust, you know, that can exacerbate respiratory conditions and other sorts of medical conditions. So it can have a deep impact on communities, both direct and indirect. And
you see it when they come to the GP, the farmers who've had to shoot their cattle and so forth?
Absolutely, and we know that in rural communities there is a higher morbidity, so there's a lot more disease. There's less access to healthcare. And often a lot of the farmers and a lot of people present quite late in their illness. So by the time they get in to see us as a doctor or as a health professional, you know, they're quite their disease state can be quite advanced. Which can have a significant impact on themselves. So,
and drought just exacerbates all that. Eating fresh fruit
and when we lay a drought on top of that, you know, people have other priorities. You know, they're trying to provide for their families, like we've heard before. They're trying to work harder on their farm and their properties, so their own health becomes less important. So it definitely is a public health concern.
What's going on, Mal? I mean, you always talk to us about the fact that you've got 140 years of rainfall records on your place. What's going on?
Well, it's interesting. We, as a family, have joked about how on earth the farmers got through in 1919 when they only had 212 odd millimetres of rain.
What's normal?
723.
Right.
So we thought, oh, that's crazy. How on earth could you ever exist on that? That could never happen. Well, in 2018, we got that. Last year, we beat it by 50 millimetres. Right. So just unbelievable. I mean, we gear ourselves up for drought. We're used to droughts. We're not prepared for 2 years of it. So I haven't had any feed for my cattle on the ground for nearly 2 years. I've got huge water reserves, but I've got probably 50% of them are empty. And the issue is from the mental health perspective. You get up of a morning, and unlike people in the city, you don't interact with a whole heap of different people. Your whole environment is going out, looking at your cattle get poorer. Dust, we've had dust storm, and we never get dust storms. We've had about 8 or 10 dust storms. We had 6 weeks continual smoke, and that does get on top of you. You just wonder, you know, is it Armageddon? What the hell's happening?
Yeah. So we're getting the same message. Sam's saying we never have to buy water. That doesn't happen. Right, and you're saying we never get dust storms. So this is unprecedented, what we're seeing. And when you drive up and down the New England highway, it's astonishing that you'll see so many trucks hauling water. Water to fill farmers' dams, water for the tanks on dry rural properties. And as we've said, water that is part of this unprecedented historic operation to shift more than 1 million litres of water a day to a town, Stanthorpe, that's effectively been blockaded by drought. I went along for the ride on one of the trucks that do those daily trips. This is the start of a 2.5-hour operation. Drivers like Shane Rossow undertake 3 times a day, siphoning water out of one dam to transport to an empty dam an hour away, up the range in Stanthorpe.
The dam up there, as of 3 weeks ago, I think, is totally turned off, so there's no water out of the dam.
So whatever you bring is what they drink?
Is what the town gets, yep.
It just seems extraordinary, you know, when you come from the city, to think that if you want to drink or flush the toilet or do some washing...
It all is now on the road. There's nothing in the creeks or the dams left now. All the domestic water is brought up on the trucks.
Shane isn't moving grains from paddock to port anymore. The drought has all but killed that business. Instead, like so many drivers in this region, he's shifting water. Is it hard pushing this volume of water up the range like this?
Oh, it's hard work for the truck. Yeah. We've got to come out of Stanthorpe and up the hill because the tanks have got to be higher than the reservoir, so they gravity feed down. Yeah, see the apples on here? They're so small because they haven't had any water.
Do you think more dams is the answer?
Well, that Emu Swamp Dam they've been talking about on the southern side of town for the last 20 years, if that was in now, the Granite Bell would have full proper produce. No one to be carting water.
There has been rain in the Southern Downs in recent days, enough to turn the roadside green, not enough to end this unprecedented haulage operation. So all these dark skies, they don't give you any hope?
Doesn't mean much, no. If it was big black clouds and high thunderheads out there, it'd be on. So everyone's got a bit of heart about it that we got some rain, it's going to go.
You can only hope.
Every day's a day closer.
Tracy, it's hard to describe the scale of this water-moving operation, but what's gone into it? It's almost like the Berlin airlift, for heaven's sakes.
Well, our above-ground storages here are designed to last for 3 years without inflow, and we've had that now, 3 years and no inflow to our urban dams. So last summer, I'm talking the 2018-19 summer when we didn't get any rainfall, we realised that there was a possibility our dams would run out this summer. So we started planning then with the state government about what the options were to keep Stanthorpe supplied with water, and we went through every option. How long did it take you to come up with, let's build all this infrastructure, let's get a whole bunch of trucks and let's spend $800,000 a month bringing every last drop we need to drink, flush the toilet into the town? I mean, that seems extraordinary. Like, what was the moment where you went, OK, we're going to have to do that? Probably February last year was when we started and said, OK, what are the solutions, what are the options? We worked through them all with the state government, with local businesses, with people who understand water in our region, people who understand the climate and whether there was a possibility we would get any rain. But at the end of the day, we knew that we had to prepare for the eventuality of not getting any rain, and that happened. So probably we looked at the options like rail, like bringing water across the border from New South Wales, what groundwater, underground water there was in this part of our region, and at the end of the day, the best option, the least expensive option, the most reliable option was trucking water from Connolly Dam in the northern part of the region here to Storm King Dam. I was talking on ABC Radio today, Sam, and I was saying it sort of feels third world, right? that you'd have to go to this amount of effort to ensure that people have enough water just to drink. How do people feel? Are they angry? Are they distressed?
Well, it can't really be angry because it's no one person's fault, really. Yeah. I mean, it's Mother Nature doing its thing. We've really got nothing to be angry about because it's happening. Like Tracy said, they've put a lot of thought into what are we going to do. Of course, the town people are asking all the time, what's the plan? What's going to happen? We're going to run out of water. And of course, these things have got to be looked into. You just can't click your fingers and say, this is what we're going to do. You know, so, yeah, it's angry in a sense that it's got to this point. We'd probably say that previous councils should have thought about it. But who was to know that, you know, the drought was going to go on for so long? You know?
I'd have to say, talking to Shane in the cab of that truck, that there was a real sense of dismay, right? He's looking out and he's saying, now that country out there shouldn't look like that. Those trees are dying in the bush. And then he's saying to me, see that dam that's empty and see that paddock beside it. That should have zucchinis. That should all be sort of flourishing. When you drive up and down the highways, do you feel all that, see all that?
Yeah, for sure. For sure. You drive from here to Toowoomba and those paddocks normally have got, grain growing through them. It's nice green paddocks and that. And you drive up there now and it's just bare country. And you can see something's missing and it's just missing. It's missing in the farmer's pocket, it's missing in the food chain. The whole thing is just not right.
And yet, a little bit of rain, a bit of grass grows on the side of the road,
exactly
and
right.
Yet everybody's still in this state,
and Ellen,
aren't they?
I have never seen grass spring back to life
Really?
the way it has now.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. We went down to Tamworth to the music festival down there, and all down the New England. You think you're driving through New Zealand.
Yeah.
And we really, like Tracy said, we haven't had those soaking rains. They're still very superficial, and the grass has just come back to life.
A green drought.
Yeah, as if say, here, everybody, just feel better. We've got, things are going to happen.
Yeah. Well, for the past 5 months, a local charity has been handing out donated water to people in need. Local Glenda Riley, wonderful woman, runs the operation. She says the water shortages have changed the fabric of this community.
The first ones I heard about and I knew something had to be done was parents showering their children with bottles of water. One of our water carriers told us he was delivering water to this older gentleman's neighbour. The water was dripping from the tanker and he came over with the jug and he was asked what he was doing and he says, I just want some clean water so I can have a cup of tea. Even though at the end of the day, a 10-litre bottle of water, it doesn't cost that much. Their budgets have been so tight that having to find that $20 a week to buy drinking water for themselves was getting too much. It's just been a cumulative effect of no work. And at its base, it's been because there's no water. Servicing for your forklifts and things like that, which at this time of the year should be running pretty well 100% in the packing sheds, they're not. So it's been fairly stressful, but I think, with the help we're giving, it is easing that little bit. They know they can come in here or to any of the other agencies and get help.
Shannon, we heard Glenda saying there that the pickers and the packers, the seasonal workers who'd usually be in town, aren't here. There's lots of businesses that are struggling and people leaving. Talk to me about what water means to farming communities, Indigenous communities and inland towns.
So I think, water is something that we take for granted, and then obviously when it's gone, we realise how much of an impact it can have. Both direct, at home by not being able to bath every day, flush the toilet all the time, have clean, available drinking water. So it can have a big detrimental impact on households and families. And then the knock-on effect is, when farmers can't employ people to run businesses or have to lay people off to keep their businesses afloat, that obviously impacts the most marginalised groups of communities where they can't get an income. And that, therefore, the income of that household goes down. And so, therefore, people are not buying fresh fruit and vegetables. They often go without. They often have to stretch their own budget. So it can cause a terrible lot of strain on households, and if people's relationship are already strained, if people have pre-existing illnesses where they have to buy medications, then often those things are put on the back burner just to, because they don't have that household income.
Let me ask Mal, this drought will break, but is this drier climate the new normal, do you think?
Well, I think we'd be pretty unwise not to listen to the science that's telling us that it is going to get drier. And you've only got to look at records. If you go back to my 140-year records, from 1900 to 1950, I got, in the old scale, 31 inches of rain. From 1950 to 2000, we only got 28 inches, and it's got drier since then. So if you look at historical records, we are starting to back off on our rainfall. You've got the scientists telling you what's happening. I mean, I'm a businessman and I like to manage my risk. You're a bloody idiot if you're not listening to it and saying, hey, we better modify what we're doing, or we're going to get this could easily happen to us again.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about dams. When we discuss ways to tackle water shortages, you often hear people talk about dams. And here in Stanthorpe, they're doing just that. They're hoping to construct the first dam to be built in Queensland in a decade. The state and federal governments have each promised tens of millions of dollars to build the Emu Swamp Dam, a proposed Emu Swamp Dam, with local irrigators pledging to also help fund the project. Okay, Sam, let's talk about dams. You got an empty dam here, the Storm King Dam, which is the drinking water dam. Why would building another dam help?
Well, any amount of water storage will help. I mean, particularly this one's going to be an irrigation dam, and I believe some of it will be for urban supply. I think, is that right, Tracy?
Possibly, yeah.
Possibly, yeah. Any irrigation dam helps the district. The district is relying heavily now on irrigation because practices have changed from the very early days.
Okay.
And we've got to this stage and we've grown to this point. We do supply a good percentage of the produce on Brisbane and Sydney markets. Yep. We have some of Australia's largest strawberry farms here. Some of Australia's largest vegetable farms are all situated here. And they've only got to that stage because of irrigation. And that irrigation is only being supplied by runoff water. That runoff water has come from rain. So when it doesn't rain, that runoff water gradually has dwindled away.
So is the dam proposal a response to what Mal was talking about, which is this is the new normal? Because you think the climate is changing based on what your father and grandfather...
Definitely changing.
Right.
Definitely changing.
And this is a response to the change?
Yeah, getting more water...
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it is the response to keep surviving and keep the district growing.
But riddle me this, though. How do you know there's going to be enough reliable rainfall to fill it?
We don't.
Right.
We don't.
Right.
We just need dams built, and when that finishes, I suppose, it finishes, but it's better than not having it.
Yeah.
It's better than not having it. The district cannot grow anymore the way it is now under these sort of conditions, but it will rain, and it will rain enough to fill the dam.
Tracy?
I think we have to have layers. I don't think there's any one solution for the future of water security in our region, here on the Granite Belt, the whole of the Southern Downs, across Queensland, New South Wales. I think that we sometimes get fooled into looking at the borders that we exist in, whether they be a local government area or a state border. We have to take a bigger perspective to water. Dams are great for holding water when it rains, but we need to have a look at sharing water around our region, sharing water between our local government areas. So dams are great, and we are 100% support dams and more dams in our region. We also need to connect the dams together. We have a classic example in our region right now where the northern part of the region is getting inflow into dams. Here in Stanthorpe, 50 kilometres away, there is no inflow into the dam. So we're going to be able to share that water around between us to even out the periods when there is no rainfall. And as we've seen the last few years, the rainfall is really patchy.
I think, Mal, sometimes we have a very citified debate about dams, right? So if I'm living in Sydney and I want to put a water tank in, I can keep it. I can keep all that water. If I want to put a bucket outside when it rains, finders, keepers, losers, weepers, my water. That's not how dams work in the Murray-Darling, is it?
No, well, we're just... in the Murray-Darling Basin, we're still going through a process where the Australian taxpayers have injected some $12 billion, that's B for Bob billion dollars, in buying back water entitlements from irrigators to make sure we can improve the health of the river. So the reality is that whatever a dam that's built, water's got to be purchased from somewhere else because of the Murray-Darling
But
Basin
hang on,
Plan.
if you build a dam, the water falls from the sky into the dam, you just keep it. Don't you just keep it?
I
Tracy's saying no.
wish that was the way it was, but it's not. The Murray-Darling Basin Plan has said there is a finite amount of water. And if you put a dam in an area, you have to take water from an existing licence to be able to put in that dam. Now, it's a bit different in this area. This area is a bit unique because the instrument that the government uses to measure what water goes to the productive sector, to the irrigators, which is called a water resource plan, has identified 3 gigalitres of water for this particular area.
So this is like my elasticized pants here that I'm wearing after Christmas. It's got a bit of give in it. The water resource plan had a bit of give in it in case you needed a bit more.
Well,
A reserve.
Mostly, sorry.
A reserve.
Yeah, well, generally they don't.
But this one does.
This one does.
Right.
Yeah, this one does. And it also has in it 1.5 gigalitres of unallocated water for urban use. So that's pretty unique. But don't forget, this is a pretty unique area. And I mean, you've seen from the way when you've driven up here, this produces feeding and food. So we're talking about stone fruit, vegetables. I mean, it is a key area, and particularly when you look at the expansion of the Australian population, that demand for food is increasing. So we've got to be able to supply that, and this area is in a unique position to be able to do it.
Yeah. Shannon, there's a strong community of Indigenous Australians in this area. They've got connections to this country. But the history of Queensland is that in the mid-1800s, people were moved off country and onto missions. And I wonder whether or not when we talk about just building a dam, that terra nullius is still in our head. You just find a bit of scrub, doesn't belong to anybody, and you just dig a dam.
Yeah, I mean, certainly those times where, communities would just build dams and obviously displace people, displace native wildlife, important vegetation, traditional ceremonial sites. I think they're all important concepts. Hopefully today and these days that local councils and governments have good relationships with traditional communities and traditional custodians to work in partnership as they would with any other parts of their community to help think about how they ensure water security in the future. And whether dams is a part of that, well then that's something for the local community to consider. And obviously those discussions are going to happen in whatever rural and remote communities that people need new water strategic planning.
But that's going to have to be part of the process.
But that will definitely have to be a part of the process. And also engaging on local Aboriginal populations to understand what the climate is like. And what has happened before. I think it only adds value to the planning and it can add value to the community in the long run.
Can I just ask Tracy, there's so much we don't know in making these big decisions about building a $100 million dam or a $90 million pipeline. There's one proposal to pipe the water from Brisbane's water supply over the range here. The regional water supply security assessment that was done by Council and the government in 2016, and the top line of the press release is good news. There's enough water in Stanthorpe to probably keep them going till mid-2030. So that was 4 years ago, and they could not have been more wrong about that. And it seemed, when I asked the question, did you model for climate change, for the drying climate that our primary producers on the panel are talking about, they went, honestly, no, we didn't.
And this is what we've really struggled with. And we've, Sam was saying before, you can always go back and say, why wasn't something done in the past? We can't do that. We have to look to the future. And so we asked in 2016 the state government to do a water security assessment for Stanthorpe and for Warwick. So we could say, what do we need to put in place for the next 10, 15, 20, 50 years in our region?
Is it too harsh to say that was Goldilocks stuff that came out of it, to say that you had secure water till mid-2030 when you're trucking water in at $800,000 a month in 2020?
The modelling is based on historical records, and Mal shows he's got those historical records and everything's changing. And we asked the question, But what about the one-off event? What about the 1 in a million or the 1 in 100 flood or the 1 in 100 drought? And they said, well, they don't take that into consideration in their planning, because in funding the construction of dams or the funding of major infrastructure, you look at the average. And unfortunately, we're not in the average anymore. We are now in a situation where we have had 3 to 5 years of well below average rainfall across our region, and we have to look outside the box. Dams are a solution, absolutely, but we need to have layers of support, and we're working with our surrounding councils, for example, from Tenterfield, us, Toowoomba, Gundawindi, Western Downs, to have a water grid here so that we can share the water between our regions.
You are watching The Drum, and with me on the panel, coming to you from Stanthorpe, in the Darling Downs in Queensland tonight, a town that, despite the rain that you're hearing behind us, has been so dry for so long, and despite the green that is flourishing with the bit of water they're getting, they're calling it a green drought, an area still very much in water crisis. With me on the panel, let me introduce you again, third-generation winemaker and owner of the Golden Grove Winery, Stan Costanzo. We were just saying we're going to dump some of this gear from the ABC and put some of your wine in the truck.
That's a great idea.
Absolutely. Just leave it on the side.
You'll be helping the district.
Absolutely. There'll be some strange boxes on the side of the road when we go home. GP, Associate Professor of First People's Health at Griffith University and Vice President of the Australian Indigenous Doctors Association, Dr. Shannon Springer. Thanks so much for coming up for us. Mayor of the Southern Downs Regional Council, Tracy Dobie, and Beef Producer, Chair of Regional Australia Institute, Councillor of the Inverell Shire and Drum Regular, Mal Peters. Well, rivers are running dry across many centres in regional Australia. Our reporter Stephanie Bolchi travelled to the New South Wales Central West, where several towns and their residents are struggling with dwindling water supplies.
I had a beautiful garden all up here.
The stress of not having a regular supply of water for her family has taken its toll on Fleur Magic Dennis. They're now in the process of moving from Eucarina.
We're definitely water refugees.
The toilet is rarely flushed, the bath water recycled.
The biggest water users are our washing, our toilet, I guess having a shower, but we only do that every 3 days or so.
The dam is managed by the town. 2 years ago, that dried up. Fleur has spent thousands carting in water. After months lobbying council, state-funded supplies are now being trucked in. 100 litres per person per day.
I'm really concerned that this is not a permanent solution.
The town wants a bore. The council says they'll get one, but they don't know when. It's a different story 1.5 hours drive away, in Dubbo, where its 38,000 residents are allowed to use nearly 3 times the amount of water. They have a target of 280 litres per person per day.
So I use this much water when I'm washing my hands.
All our laundry water goes straight into a drum and we pump it out onto our gardens.
This is where Dubbo gets the majority of its town water supply. It can hold 3 times that of Sydney Harbour. And just a few years ago, before the drought, it was overflowing. As you can see, it's a very different story now and is sitting at about 1.6% of its capacity.
They had 10 years of water and they've ran it out in 3 years as a result of bad management.
Worst case scenario, residents may be drinking solely groundwater by mid-year if the Macquarie River runs completely dry. The council is drilling for more bores.
Some bores may run dry, some bores might hold up.
Residents are being warned the current level 4 water restrictions could rise. Last year, the council was criticised for kowtowing to residents when it weakened restrictions.
You cannot just impose really hard water restrictions all at once because you get some pushback from residents. We've got to ease into it.
But it isn't working in Dubbo, where residents consume 28 litres each per day above the daily target. Winds are whipping up mighty red dust storms from parched paddocks.
It's no more heartbreaking than for the person who owns the land to see their land blowing away.
Peter Schuster manages 3,700 hectares of land south of Dubbo. Most of it is now dry. Only 160 hectares can be used efficiently to feed core breeding livestock. Without a river allocation or sustained rainfall, they're using groundwater to keep the stock alive.
We rely on scientists who monitor the situation and advise us on our extraction limits.
As chair of the Upper Macquarie Groundwater Users Group, he says irrigators have helped keep businesses afloat during the drought.
No one's going to deprive the people of Dubbo of their water, least of all us, who rely on the Dubbo community and contribute to the Dubbo community. We're part of that community.
Stephanie Bolchi reporting there. Let me introduce our next guest. For the past 12 months, James McTavish has been travelling around New South Wales, examining the situation on the ground and speaking to communities in his role as the state's regional town water supply coordinator. The aim of his job is to ensure safe and acceptable water is secure for these areas. Thanks so much for coming to Stanthorpe for us, James. Much appreciated.
Great to be here.
We saw in that package people were talking about themselves as refugees. You travel around and talk to people. How are they dealing with it?
Well, we've got around 90 towns and communities across regional New South Wales which have less than 12 months of their usual supply remaining, and that's everything from bigger centres like Dubbo, as you've just seen, to smaller centres like Packsaddle, north of Broken Hill. And it's pretty well across the whole state. We've seen a bit of an improvement in conditions on the north coast, but you can't say that they're out of the woods just yet, despite the rainfall prediction for the next week or so. And in all of those places, the impacts from a water shortage are substantial. They typically affect people at the lower end of the SES spectrum more deeply, but they are right across all of those communities. They affect business, they affect people's well-being, they affect people's health and mental health. And those issues are going to be very difficult to resolve in the longer term.
Yeah. And Tracy, in the story there we were seeing that there's some resistance to water restrictions. Do you feel a frustration as a leader trying to make people understand that they've got to live on 80 litres a day?
Well, we've brought in the water restrictions across the whole of our local government area when we started realising that our water storages were going to basically not stand up without inflow, of course. And then that was made worse by the fact that so many of our rural residents' house tanks were running dry, and we realised we had to share those urban water supplies across the whole of our local government area. And some of our communities jumped in really quickly and straight away got down to those targets. Others have taken longer and struggled to get to those targets. But we have to be realistic about what we're asking people to do in their homes and change habits of lifetimes.
It's pretty harsh, right? I mean, I love a graph. So I wanted to know how we use water, not water for the environment, how consumptive water. So we've got a pie graph. Have a look. According to the latest annual figure from the Australian Bureau of Statistics, Australians used about 16,000 gigalitres of water. That's 33 times the amount of water in Sydney Harbour. New South Wales used the most. But only 12% of all the water used, a trickle, proportionally speaking, is consumed by households. By far the biggest user of water is the agricultural sector, which soaks up 62% of all water used in Australia, the biggest proportion going to sheep, cattle and grain. Okay, so only 12% of the water that we use is for drinking and flushing the toilet. How the heck do we run out of water, James?
Well, across regional New South Wales, we only use 300 gigalitres across the whole of regional New South Wales for town water use. So that's everything outside of Sydney, Newcastle and a little bit in the Central Coast. 300 gigalitres. So it's a tiny amount of water when you look at the whole of system availability. The issue is getting it to where it needs to be. When you start, up here at the top end of the Murray-Darling Basin, there are losses that occur from the environment, from evaporation, from people taking water.
But that's all known. We know all of that. And given that drinking water and all the rest of it is such a small amount, shouldn't we be able to organise our water use so that we do not have inland towns in this country running out of water to flush the toilet?
Well, in a lot of places, what we're seeing now is something which is quite extraordinary, simply because we're in an extraordinary climatic and weather event. What we're actually seeing, and as has been previously said, is we've got record low inflows. So what we previously assumed to be safe to be using is no longer available. And when you look at the depletion curves and the usage curves across the basin, we're really in uncharted territories in most areas.
Okay, so Mal, you're an irrigator. Should there be a rule that we quarantine enough drinking water for humans before we distribute to the environment, to agriculture or to any other use? Should that be a rule?
Well, there is a rule now in the Murray-Darling Basin Authority that urban use is top priority. So urban use, and then everything is in a descending scale from there. The problem is that when they did the modelling for the urban use, I understand that one of the ministers had the brilliant idea when he instructed the bureaucrats to disregard the millennial drought figures. So it was a dry period, nowhere near as bad as now, and they were instructed to ignore those figures. So what's happened is that we left less in the dams than what we should have.
No.
So now we've been through this, I think that the reality in the modelling will be this is the worst event and there will be a substantial more amount of water in the dams. Now the problem is when you're in the top of the catchment, like you are here, that makes no difference because no water was running in. The problem is in this situation is that this dam was built in 1954 and we now have a increased growth in population and climate change, etc. And the reality is that governments are going to have to spend more money to make sure that regional infrastructure is going to be spent because we need more regional infrastructure. People are making decisions to live out in regions already. Mm-hmm. And if we're going to continue that, we need to make sure governments spend the money to put that infrastructure in place.
But the other part of it, James, is that and I've seen you say it too, as when we get to this stage, people's need for water trumps the environment. I mean, if we're into an era of much more prescriptive use of water, 80 litres a day here, and that's a lot, you know, for people living on tank water will be living on less. Is that the most creative we can be, to just say we'll take water from the environment rather than to have a really hard conversation about what we grow in this country?
Look, I think we need to look at how we use our water more generally. You know, the reality is that we've concentrated a lot in the discussions we've had here on the supply side, but there's also, you know, we need to be looking at things on the demand side as well. You know, how we actually bring that thinking of 80 litres or thereabouts into people's thinking every day, not just when it's dry. And how we actually value the resource more efficiently or more effectively, you know, how we reuse water. You know, should we be looking at either indirect potable reuse more closely or managed aquifer recharge?
And so you're not talking about what I do with the water that comes out of my washing machine. You're talking about drinking, I think you were saying you drink the water that has been flushed down the toilet in Canberra. Yep. Brave man.
Yeah, so I live in Wagga and I live on the Murrumbidgee River, and the reality is that every upstream user that has a sewage treatment plant that puts water into the Murrumbidgee River comes past my hometown.
Okay.
And every person that lives on a lower, below us on the river, who accesses that water, is using a form of indirect potable reuse. And the reality is we should be looking at indirect potable reuse or other systems because we need to value that wastewater as a resource.
I'm just going to ask you straight out, Sam, I mean, this is never a popular question in regional Australia, but should we prioritise our water use? Should we prioritise water for what we eat in agricultural use?
Yeah, well, we need water for agriculture, so prioritise in what way do you mean? Is in how we use it more effectively?
We've got 62% of water, consumptive water, is used for agriculture. So we can grow cotton. They've got multinational cotton interests.
Right,
You've got foreign interests growing almonds in the southern basin. It'll take 5 years before they produce nuts, a lot of those plants. We can do that. Or should we prioritise food? Because that's why you're saying you want a new dam, for food security.
That's right. I mean, nuts and things like that are food, is food.
Can't eat cotton.
Cotton, I think we can do without in this country until we've got more water. If we've got the water there, for sure, allow these products to be grown, but it shouldn't be sold off to these conglomerates that just get bigger and bigger and buy up you know, more and more water. I don't think that's the Australian way of farming. It's a little bit more American style, that is, and I don't think we really need to go that way. Small farming has always been the big thing here in Australia. So, yeah, I think we need to prioritise in those areas. If we want to grow cotton, I think it needs to be a hell of a lot more restricted than what it is now. Give more water to the food chain, for sure, yeah.
We were talking about it, Shannon, in terms of triage, you know, Florence Nightingale, whoever's bleeding the most gets the most attention in the medical profession. That's how accident and emergency works. So we're triaging water for urban use in lots of inland towns. We're triaging water for the environment. We've got people pulling fish out of the rivers around Dubbo to preserve their DNA, put the fish in tanks. Should we triage agriculture and say, well, we're going to prioritise food security?
Well, certainly food security has become a big issue in Australia, and you know, getting affordable fresh produce for Australians is a really important issue, and I think as we've all heard, as the climate is changing, we will have to have that discussion and have real conversations about that, and particularly planning for the future. You know, if we want to shore up a secure food chain, then that's something that we need to consider. Absolutely.
But no, that's not how we do it, is it?
It's not at the moment, but the reality is all these building dams require huge amounts of public funds. The public now will demand, I think there's no risk of that, they will demand that water is going to be used. Nobody's going to tolerate this third world rubbish of carting water. That's just not going to happen. We're going to have to demand that where the money is expended is in areas where we need it. Now, quite clearly, food production is critical, and I think there's any of the viewers would be quite comfortable with the expenditure of money to grow food. When it gets to these other areas, I think we're going to have that conversation. It's public money. If the public aren't happy to spend it, well, I think we've got a problem.
But the first thing people start to say when you say that is, you can't tell farmers what to grow, James. This is not Russia. They'll grow whatever they think. They'll make their economic decisions. And if the most money you can make from the water, increasingly expensive water in a drought, is nuts and cotton, that's where the water will go, and they'll outbid those dairy farmers who'll walk off the land forever.
Yeah, look, and the most productive use that you can get for your water is in urban areas. And the reality is that it's a balancing act that we do need to use here. If we can get better value out of the available water for all of our regional communities, then that's a better outcome. The issue is, I suppose, for a lot of people and a lot of these communities, they rely on agriculture. They're entirely reliant on one part of the economy. And if we don't have a sustainable agricultural economy, then a lot of these communities will be deeply impacted and lose a reason for being.
The other thing is too, Ellen, that I get a bit jagged of these multinationals that are getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And I don't deem it acceptable that huge amounts of public money, our taxpayer money, goes into these multinationals. You know, we've just had a big one down south. It was a big multinational Australian company. Well, it's just sold out to a Canadian pension fund. Well, so our taxpayer money has gone into propping them up. Well, that's not acceptable. I'd love it if it goes into propping up small farmers. I'd support that till the cows come home. But I sure as hell don't support propping up multinational companies for them to get bigger.
And do you think the rules, Sam, around how we use water policy as well as drought policy need to change?
Yeah, it needs to be monitored a lot more than it is, particularly in our area and that. We've got a certain amount of water we can water harvest and that, but it just needs to be controlled a little bit better than it is.
Yeah, talk to me about bores. People at home will be thinking, are bores the answer? You just dig down to the Grand Artesian Basin and that'll solve your problem, James.
Every water source is finite. The fact that you just can't see the groundwater doesn't mean that it's they're going to be there forever. So we've got to be very careful about what we do with bore infrastructure. in a number of places we've sunk bores. Just down the road here in Tenterfield, we're in the process of finalising 8 new bores for town water supply in Tenterfield. But that's okay for Tenterfield because there is available water and it is a sustainable aquifer that we're accessing. In some places, there is substantial risk to the groundwater availability because everybody wants to use it. We need to go tread very carefully when we look at accessing groundwater for any reason, because the groundwater is not infinite. It has to come from somewhere, and when it's recharged from a river, when it's recharged from rainfall, you're going to see a decline in groundwater over time.
Some of the bores up in the Namoi Valley were the allocations on those were reduced by 80%. So they're sure as hell not a finite resource. The other concern is, I was chairman when they did the $5 million study on the Namoi Valley. Yeah. And there is still a lot of science needs to be had about the connection between the bores and the surface water. So there's, the jury's still out on that. Some areas we understand it, but a greater majority of it we don't.
Yeah. We have 3,700 active bores across our local government area right now. That's one for every 2 square kilometres. That's a big draw on the groundwater. So what James and Mal are saying is absolutely right. It is a finite resource. And right now we're in drought. It's raining. We've got a bit of water in our dams. But while those dams are empty, people go to the groundwater to source water to keep the crops alive. And, Sam's a classic example. He will talk to you about how much water is being purchased here in Stanthorpe from the bores owners in the northern part of our region to keep the more high value crops, the food crops, going. Yeah, so there's no silver bullet solution. No. Well, you've heard it here tonight, what living without water looks like. It changes the fabric of a community, pushing them to extreme measures and forcing us all to think about how we use water in this country. If this is the new normal, and all the data seems to suggest it is, what could make us feel secure in a changing climate? That first question to you, what would make you feel secure? Would it be a new dam, Sam? Yeah, dam for sure, more water for sure. And we need to start looking at different varieties as a grape grower with research being done. And here at the college there's vines on trial now that are more drought resistant coming from the hotter climates because we can see the climate is changing. So we need to look into that area. So things are being done there. So innovation makes you feel resilient because you're doing something. Water security, a dam is just one part of it. Water is life. And, it's the lifeblood of agriculture. It always has been and always will be. This district started off with no irrigation, of course. It just relied on rain. But it used to rain more often in those days. So gradually, as the district started to grow and people realised that you could pump water up from the river and irrigate your crops, irrigation was introduced and you became more productive and there was more food being produced. And then we started putting in bigger dams to collect the water. But then there's now the moratorium has kicked in. It's been in probably the last 10 years where we can't. So this is put in dams to take in overland. So this is a big moment for innovation and so on. Shannon, talk to me. Sometimes you get magical thinking and people come up with these cockamamie schemes to drought-proof the country, to turn the rivers inland, these huge engineering projects. What do you think makes people feel more confident about the future?
Well, I think we really need to think about the modelling and what we've used as surrogate markers for understanding how much water we have and how long that will last for. So I think with the context of a changing climate is really important to get the science right. So we can plan, governments can strategically plan about what they can do, but we also need to understand the reality in which we live. Understanding that in some parts there is going to be prolonged periods without water. So what are we growing there? How are we using water? I think, water is such a valuable commodity that we need to rethink the whole process behind looking after water and how it looks after our people.
Yeah, rethink how we live on this dry continent. I saw you in the paper, Tracy, saying what would make you feel more secure in your community is a year of average water and then another year of average rainfall.
That's exactly right. And as we've talked about here, it's not just about financial security of what water brings to us, it's our mental health. And when you live in rural Queensland, rural Australia, you're in touch with the land. And to have ground that's damp, to have rain, that would make us feel secure, as would more visitors to our region.
Right.
You know, we rely heavily on tourism when we don't have agriculture to support us. And then underpinning that, other industries as well. You know, James was talking before about in rural New South Wales, in rural Queensland, we are, in our case, reliant on, for 30% of our income, 30% of our employment, totally on agriculture. We need other businesses to underpin that. So as the climate changes, as our agriculture is impacted, we have other ways to keep our small towns and villages alive so that they continue to support the agricultural sector.
Yeah. Is it about having real conversations, Mel, about if this is the new normal, then what are we going to do differently?
I think what's happened from this drought, as opposed to earlier droughts, we've said we get droughts, we'll get through it, away we go. What this has done is put a lot of us in a situation where we've never faced it before. And we've said, geez, we're really going to have to do something different. I mean, in agriculture, we've been doing a lot of stuff different. There's been huge amounts of money spent on research and development. We've got plants that will now grow in drier pastures. We've got huge improvements in irrigation. When you look at what happens in Israel, there's still a long way to go. I think what this drought has done is made us realise we are in a dry country. Right. We're going to have to do it a lot different. And I think we're smart enough to do it. And I think that'll happen. So, and if the ABC can come down to my farm, show us a range, that'll be even better.
We'll get on the road together, hey, James? We'll go on the road. We'll take the whole show on the road, and everywhere we go, hopefully it will rain. Well, it is wonderful to hear the rain. Thank you so much to all the members of our panel. That's all we have time for. Sam Costanzo, thanks for coming. Dr. Shannon Springer, Tracy Dobie, the Mayor, Mal Peters, and our guest, James McTavish. Thank you all for joining us. As Tracy says, it's still a great place to visit. Jump in the car and come and have a look at Stanthorpe and the wonderful Darling Downs. Julia's in tomorrow. Good night to you.